in the morning again. And today she's gonna talk about pure thought, like what's in your mind, not the material world, but the symbolic world. So, how are these two connected and why are they different? Why is the representation of something not the material reality of something? That takes us down the rabbit hole of sign theory, semiotics to be precise. Um, if you study the history of semiotics, you will find some very prominent figures who are very lovely. I like a lot the Italian guy, Umberto Eco, who was a great semiotic guy. He wrote a lot about an interpretation and how interpretation ends at a certain point when you derive too much from too little data. This is what Umberto Eco displays in his wonderful novel, The Foucauldian Pendulum. I hope it's the right way to say it in English. And he also expands on this in his detective novel, Name of the Rose, I suppose it's called in English. You know, maybe the movie with Sean Connery, where they try to show what Umberto Eco tries to show in the novel is how it is not really a Sherlock Holmes thing, semiotics. But that's another path. So semiotics is a very kind of complicated topic because if you look at signs, and this is what semiotics is about, signs like sem is the smallest unit of signification. It's sem, S-E-M, and it's like the word meme, like mem, which is the smallest entity which you can remember. It's a mem or meme, and a zem, or if you want to call it seem, you can. I don't know if it makes sense. Semiotics is a very old field of work, and it actually is based in very old ideas about the representation of the world. So there is a world that you can empirically see, feel, analyze, and have data about because you have this data processing unit um, body, and so it gives you information about everything, but it doesn't give you interpretative answers about everything. So you look at the stars and the moon and the sky, and you get data. So you see the star is there, the star is moving there, the star is moving there, the sun is moving there. I don't know. You see whatever you see in the sky. And this is actually a very good example for early semiotics because semiotics and making meaning is, first of all, a deal of dealing with what you don't understand, because that is actually the nature of the data processing unit called body, which humans and other organisms on this planet, from which humans not really evolved, but which they chimerically imply in their biology, um, have grown. So yeah. So let's look at the old star watching people again. Yeah, they watch the stars and the stars move and there's the sky, firmament, and it's moving and it's changing. And you get this inconsistent data because it doesn't make sense. You have a assumption about yourself, which is I am a steady frame. This is always the assumption that humans and other organisms naturally make because it's their perception, the perception of a conscious being, especially. It's not really in the perception of not conscious beings, despite there is a realization of consciousness in an abstract form. There's not in the specific material form, which is the point about being conscious. That there is a material process of data analysis, reconstruction, and semiotic procedure. Semiosis, how it's called in semiotics. It's the concept semiosis is the making meaning part. It's just semiosis, like creating signs, and the whole process should be caught or termed or featured in this single word, semiosis. It's the whole process. And you can make it very many complicated layers about semiosis. You can make it very abstract and formal and logical and use different kind of language making techniques. Like one famous example is maybe the Boole operators, like the English guy, Boole. He thought he saw God, and then he came up with the if-that conjunctions, which are, if you're not into computer programming, it is still very obvious if you use this most simple computer programming language that is available in every browser. It's HTML, and there are if-that conjunctions. Are there? Not really. So you have to use JavaScript or something that is more scripty, but you can include it in HTML, and you can then use Boole system, which is the basic of binary logarithmic computational algorithms. Just to have the I'm not a computer expert thing here, because that's not my field. I'm not a computer expert. I'm talking about semiotics, and I have some specified knowledge about neural networks and self-learning systems, autopoiesis, and um, a lot, like some, to be humble, and some knowledge about yeah, how nonlinear machines, which is the cybernetic term for organisms. Cybernetics is a field developed already very early. It's really from the 1920s, like even in the 1910s, and even before cybernetics is. But as a genre, it really became popular in the 50s and the 60s, where it was not about only creating weapons, because that's what cybernetics actually created first, like the guy Norbert Wiener, for example, working for the US American government, creating self-targeting stuff, like yeah, using the techniques of neural networking and self-learning machines to make shooting aircraft better. Like that is the first application of cybernetics. Like always, it's a military application, but in the long run, became what we now know as hypertext language. It's what you have when you look at the web page like Wikipedia and you see all the cross-referencing. That's what Heinz von Förster, an Austrian US American spiritist philosopher, put down in with doing workshops with his students. I think in this tech, how is it called? This tech university in the US. Uh, I don't know right now. But yeah, he created first books with hyperlinks, like made manually with color coding and all this stuff. So you had a normal book, but it actually worked like a hypertext book. So it was kind of revolutionary for that time to use cross-referencing logic to create different patterns of reading and recognition, which is very important in machine learning, because machine learning doesn't always rely on, like does almost never rely on what humans would call metaphorical knowledge or imagery or fantasy knowledge, but it's only mostly relying on patterned knowledge, which is not really caring about the meaning or sense of anything, but it's just caring about how many times does something put up, and when does something come up after another thing. So modern AI technology is kind of following what the French empiricists and lexicograph, how to put it in English, the people who positivists and early materialists even, they just counted stuff. They counted this. It's French people now. I think Comte is one of them, and they started just counting letters in books. And then they said there are 50 million A's in this book and 22,000 B's. And every third word after the second word with 5 letters has 3 letters. And won't make any lot of sense in this early 19th century empiricist strategy, which seemed a little odd then, because why should you do that? But it came to fruition in modern AI technology, where it's always about the pattern and what comes before and what comes after. So yeah, it's a kind of materialist in this very early non-Marxist and more like very practical, like alchemist kind of alchemy kind of way. And but let's not hesitate to jump to the future and get to more current forms of semiotics. The most influential semiotician, I would say, and I think that's kind of the what the academy would say, is Ferdinand de Saussure, the French guy who invented structuralism in a way. Lévi-Strauss invented structuralism, but you could say that Saussure really did the important part, because Lévi-Strauss was just a colonialist murderer in a way, indirectly, but he was kind of making rapist colonial adventures he paid for with his money from the French government, and then created weird maps of little villages, which he thought to be very primitive. And then he tried to figure out if there's a structure in this, which you can just see by looking at the map. That's also very important for structuralism, to remember this concept of map, because if you have a map of something, you don't have to deal with the specifics. And that's very important for very many reasons in capitalism, because specifics are personal and are very hard to make marketing with. Specifics are deep, dark, and kind of hidden, opaque, semi-transparent, and not visible to the naked eye. So you cannot really make marketing with deep connections of people. That's not really working. You can only use marketing using maps of meaning, maps of desire, maps of consumerism, maps of people, maps of identity. so from Ferdinand de Saussure, there is the most important counterpart to Ferdinand de Saussure, which is the US American, again, because we're talking Western imperial hegemony philosophy here. We're not talking about the real world, about what is really the history of semiotics. I'm not talking about this. I made some points about ancient semiotics, but it's not what I'm really talking about here, because I'm talking about the academy, because I'm talking about institutional power structures and how they use science as self-immunization strategy or auto-immunization strategy. And so I will not really go into what is really the history of semiotics, but I will just talk about what the Western hegemony perceives as semiotics, because for the moment now, it's not really important to have a general understanding what semiotics actually is, but it is more important to understand what the, how to put it, the doomsday machine thinks what semiotics is. So yeah, so you have two things in semiotics actually. I think there are three things that they know. Like when I say they, I mean the people in power. Call them bourgeoisie, call them, I don't know, techno anarchists, libertarians, call them white Christians. I don't know. I don't care. I do care, but it's not the part of the video. So, the second guy everyone needs to love in this context of semiotics is the weird one, C.S. Peirce. It's a guy. He was living in the United States of America, and he's kind of connected to very good people, like the very friendly sociologist John Dewey, who was very, very friendly. And but C.S. Peirce wasn't that friendly. He was more an elitist. He was a real elitist and a real I know it better guy. So he was not having it with anyone because when he was young, he came up with this idea following Kantian traditions, like from Immanuel Kant, the German trans woman, living in a tower, being alone all the time. And mm, so, yeah, he took it from Kant and tried to make a semiotic theory which fits to the transcendental beliefs of Immanuel Kant, because that was his long-term idea. He was fascinated in German idealism. And if you know German idealism, like Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, all this stuff, um, you will understand, yeah, it's early Hegel, it's not the late Hegel, it's more the Hölderlin Hegel from the first part, where they wrote the Manifesto of German Idealism. I don't remember the exact name, but it's very lovely. It's about German Romanticism. Mm. Gründungsdokument des deutschen bla bla bla. So yeah. Where was I? C.S. Peirce, trying to include Kantian, and by including Kant, also including Spinoza. That's the point, because Kant is all about Spinoza, and there's no Kant without Spinoza. So when trying to make up a semiotic theory that is actually able to include Spinoza and Kant into one integrated sign theory, a semiotic theory, he made a bold choice, and he created a concept called thirdness, which he loved a lot. It's not really a great new idea in some sense, because you know the Holy Trinity and the Holy Triangle and the three as a concept maybe, but if it didn't matter because it's a secular time, so it didn't really make a big difference using this religious metaphorical way of creating semiotic kind of post-structuralist kind of setup, because he was just not happy with structuralism. Because yeah, sure, it's true. If I take a word, and now we're back to basic semiotics, if I take a word like apple, and it signifies something looking like an apple, like apple, then you have this thing which arbitrary marker, like it's, but you call it pepple, and you call it schnapple, and you call it wapple, and it will still be an apple. It will not change the material condition of the object. If you change the name, it won't. It doesn't matter. So you can say apple, schnapple, or banana gurke. It doesn't change the material object. So from this proposition, I think I was gone for a second, but now I'm back. From this proposition, mm, um, C.S. Peirce comes to the idea that there needs to be, like I said, a thirdness. I don't know if the sentence makes sense. This little break a little took me off my train of thought, but I hope it still continues in the right direction. I hope so. Yeah. So thirdness is the concept which makes an idealistic claim about why is there even interpretation if the signs and the material objects are disconnected and only arbitrarily signifying, yeah, not each other, but the signifier signifying the signified. This is socio-structuralist basic thing. From this basic thing, the idea what Foucault later calls discourse is formed. It's relational in a purely semiotic sense. So it will not include materialism, not at all. That's the point. Structuralism is an anti-materialist thing. That's why it's about mapping and not about loving. And now I could say C.S. Peirce did it better by including thirdness, but his thirdness was not an effective body, a chimeric organic composition of all the ages of organicist life or bacteria and all the stuff and the snails in your head and all the stuff. No, 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 no. It was not. He was making it the same way, like earlier on, this guy Descartes, who made the difference between body and mind. He was kind of using the same strategy because his enemy were again the Christians, who wouldn't be facing the Christians, which are liars, and we know that because their God is just a little hippie walking around and loving women and loving children and being happy. So there is no ancient super Christian God, and all the Christians should be anarchists. I said that before. So back on track. So fighting Christianity, C.S. Peirce made his concept of thirdness a totally transcendental concept, which doesn't really answer the question what the thirdness is, but makes it a riddle, makes it hidden in plain sight, like everything. So you just put a pyramid and you put the thirdness on top, and then you have the same concept which Sigmund Freud will use for his hierarchy of inner mental states. The superego, the ego, and the it. It's the same structural concept that, or formal concept to use the precise terms here, the same formal concept which C.S. Peirce uses creating his semiotic structure, system, whatever you want to call it. So work, piece of work, body of work. So yeah, starting out as a pragmatist, C.S. Peirce was too elitist to have a share, whatever. So he called his own ideas pragmativist because he didn't like people. So he was not interested in people. He was living alone. His wife was caring for him. His students came to him. He was doing different jobs, doing stuff because he was always about the true nature of his super scientific endeavor. So he created nerdy systems of any kind of language and semiotic under divisions, like Aristotelian way. In an Aristotelian way, he created some like genealogies of science, like everything was or is. If you read his books, it's everything in little tables, and if the person is there and the sign and how it's displayed. What I didn't even care to remember this stuff when I read it first because it's kind of really not interesting. It's just the way of creating power knowledge. So yeah, in this way, Foucault is right because he knows power and is a power agent. So he knows how power science systems are formed, and he's part of it. So yeah, he knows. And so Peirce was also part of it, more for a personal reason because he was kind of, I don't know how to put it, peacocky. He was cocky, so he wanted to show off that he knows best. So yeah, so he died lonely. Which I always thought was very funny when I wrote my final thesis in my university about pragmatism, that the guy inventing pragmatism was actually a poor guy not being able to sustain himself. That was kind of funny to me. So when I studied all the works of pragmatism and the history of semiotics and the history of philosophy leading to this, I had kind of a lot of fun. And I, to make this little off-road talk complete, I then combined Peirce with the German discourse magician Jürgen Habermas and created a theory of autolog, which is the theory of you cannot lie to yourself, which is a semiotic truth. Because in all the semiotics I studied, I found out that there is no meta-analysis in itself, like there is no reference to reference, and this is very important. Especially in German philosophy, there is this guy called Niklas Luhmann who invented paradoxically including system theory, which is the German bad way of making cosmology. And yeah, he kind of brought me to this point to realize that semiotics can actually not be understood like Luhmann exaggerates on this premise that what Peirce is already putting out there, that the thirdness, the interpretative stance, is not reality, but just a formal, abstract, derived idea of something that could be life or love or hope or stuff. No, no, no. So they make it like the other way around. They deduct from information that there should be a subject, despite they don't care if there is one, because they're not in the tradition of subjectivity, but in the tradition of deontology, which is focusing on not being oneself, but being all self, which is a very cute concept, but it really only applies to elitist and rich people who have all the resources and privilege to just fulfill their own private little Idaho and live in idiosyncrasy. This is not a possibility for anyone, but for those who live in their armchair and create marble towers of their own thought. So yeah, it's a good idea for the people on themselves, and it's a basic idea of whiteness nowadays. So if you don't like all these concepts and you think that there is a body and there is something that feelings, affects, this existence, reality, materialism, that there is some sense, like that there is a sense in existence itself. And that's kind of the only exit I can propose to leaving Western philosophy traditions of semiotics here, because the Wittgensteinian way is not working, which is escaping this by formal logic, and any other kind of created language stuff is not working. Accelerationism is not working. Nothing of it is working. Psychoanalysis is not working. Spiritualism, mysticism, like everything is not working, because they all deal with the idea of giving back explanation to the unexplainable, and the inexplicable is in itself part of the data, which is what the point of being pragmatic actually means, that you accept that you don't have the data. You don't. You just have some data, some random data, and you have a very specifically working mind, and this mind thing creates new data from data, and then you can work with the new data comparing to the old data. There's nothing new and nothing more to do. Like, so exiting the thirdness and exiting Saussure's duality, the proposition I make is a fourthness. It's very easy. You have three dimensions. It's three dimensions of space and one dimension of consciousness. And the dimension of consciousness is a one-dimensional dimension. It's just like they say, a point. So that's how I semiotically derive the whole stuff that I said in other videos. If you want to understand how a fourth dimension works, you look up fourth dimension projection on YouTube, and you see how there is a way of including everything in the data set without having a problem of understanding it. You can create layers which include data but don't really make it go away. You preserve the data and you still have a perspective on it, and it's not a meta perspective but critical intimacy, which is the term that I think Spivak uses to respond to deconstruction. So you reach critical intimacy, and they can also guide you to the wonderful ideas of the social science method, grounded theory, which is a method of just working with very materialist concepts of understanding, like I had enough information, I feel well fed with information, I, I do think this is a lot, like all these more fuzzy logic quantifiers of information, you can use them, and then you create a consistent social theory, which is not mind ravishing populist bullshit, but reality, and really deals with the people on the street, which is the same idea as militant research in communist or anarchist or other traditions of fighting back. So, yeah, I think that was my very short and fast paced lesson on basic semiotics. If you like basic semiotics, like I said, you maybe look up something by Umberto Eco, which is very funny, or you don't. And if you don't, then you just remember that being, and this is where I started, being of symbolic and materialist order, um, and that the materialist world is coded in symbolic language in signification, which creates a necessity to understand the difference between materialist reality, objects not changing in the time you're observing them, and semiotic reality, symbolic reality, which is changing in the instant you actually look at it, like it's changed by observance. So there's very different, very, very different. So yeah. So this concept has to be understood, that the map are not the humans, that the mind is not the reality, and that signs are not objects. And from there, anyone can do whatever anyone wants. But this is important to remember, because if you don't remember that, you will get in the very bad situation where the symbolic order will overtake your material order. And there are different ways for rich people. The material order will take the symbolic order, and so you don't have any bad dreams anymore because you're just fucking rich, and you replace your nightmares by objects. That's a very ritualistic, tokenistic way of doing it. But if you don't have the money and the riches to do it, you can only try to keep it at bay. That means you have to remember that all the representation in your head does make sense. So any kind of information popping up, oh, I think the flower is a glass, is a bear, it does make sense. It doesn't have to make sense in this moment, but it has to be accepted. It's a state of acceptance of semiotic self-production, autopoiesis in your brain. That is the main way of being able to communicate your own truth. It doesn't matter if people around you say that what you communicate is not proper, or is not in the right mode of ability, or is not, I don't know, is not logical or anything, like they put any kind of criteria on it, then you should not engage in this. And I will finish this by quoting Charles Sanders Peirce, Four Principles of Authority, I think, because I think I loved that when I was studying in the fixation of belief. No, this is the original essay. Here are the four methods. Yeah, the fixation of belief. So, the fixation of belief, four methods according to Charles Sanders Peirce. I will not comment on C.S. Peirce anymore. He has written Pierce, but his name is Peirce. First, method of tenacity. The first method identified by Peirce is the method of tenacity. It essentially involves an individual resisting other principles, opinions, viewpoints, dogmas, or attitudes that challenge his or her beliefs. He or she simply wastes no time in trying to make up his or her mind. Thus, this individual is stubborn, unyielding, and closed-minded. Yeah. 2. Method of authority. In the method of authority, an individual looks up to a figure such as an individual or institution he or she deems as an authority to determine which beliefs they are going to accept. Examples of these figures include parents, teachers, religious leaders and religious institutions, celebrities and politicians and their political party. 3. Method of taste. Peirce called the method of taste as the a priori method. In this one of the four methods of explaining fixation of belief, the individual chooses principles, opinions, viewpoints, dogmas, and attitudes that sound good to him or her and that could bring forth personal benefits. In some instances, it also explains the tendency of others to cherry pick from established dogmas. 4. Method of science. The fourth method of fixing belief is called the method of science. Essentially, it involves accepting an assumption as true for the simplest reasons that it sounds logical or reasonable, although it remains untested or unproven. The assumption is believable because it works to certain real and regular laws, or that it simply makes sense. So enjoy your day. That was Xenia. Be blessed. Love the children, love the birds, love the animals. Don't be like me and talk to the television in the morning and smoke cigarette. No, be healthy and do good life.